So, pranam to all of you. Good morning from North Carolina. And today we are continuing with our discussion of Sri Raga-vartma-candrika. We are in our 19th lecture. So today we will continue with the study of second illumination of the Raga-vartma-candrika. We will be studying today verses or prose number 2 and 3, if time allows. But as usual, let's first begin by going through a brief recap of what we studied last Monday. We started officially the second section of Raga-vartma-candrika. Also, we made some brief recap of the whole of part 1, first illumination. We gave some introduction to part 2 also as well before starting officially with it. This has 8 verses or 8 prose. It will be mainly centered on this conception of Aishwarya and Madhurya, how they play out, especially connected with Krishna and Braja Lila, of course, and the goal of the practice that was described in the first section. So in the first verse or prose of this second illumination, a particular topic is presented under the label of the dilemma between Bhagavan's Aishwarya, Sarvajñata, and Mugdhata, omniscience and bewilderment, if you will. So there Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was starting his case with an important question by describing how Sri Krishna and Braj is totally absorbed in Leela, being Leela Purushottam, especially with the gopis of Braj, especially with Srimati Radharani. And in this way, he remains totally unaware of anything else, any kind of loss, lamentation, duties, calamity, anxiety, whatever, struggling with enemies. So the point is, he has no other chance, he makes this point, of thinking about anything else from Vrindavaneshwari Sri Radhe, and the extension of her in the form of all the Brajavasis, if you will, of what the Brajavav personifies. So the point is, he's totally captured and enchanted by the loving interaction with them. So the question that Vishwanath presents in the beginning is, who will then accept the service that the sadhakas in this world, raga sadhakas, not yet siddhas, may offer to him the praises, the services in the context of raga nuga bhakti. So this is the very beginning of the second part with this very interesting question, when Vishwanath presents the tension between Madhurya and Aishwarya. How, on some point, till with what we have spoken till now, we connected them with Raga and Vaidhi respectively, and respectfully as well. And also how 2 different types of prema are coming from a particular engagement. If you engage in Vaidhi, you'll get a particular goal. If you engage in Raga, you get a particular goal, more connected with Madhurya, Aishwarya, depending on the case. So he's trying to further clarify what he already explained in the first section, but now presenting it from a different vantage point. So he presents this question, and he himself offers a possible solution in the next section of this first prose or verse, when he says, well, the solution may be the expansion of Krishna Vrindavan, Paramatma. The Paramatma who is in everyone's heart, is the witness, omniscient, may listen to those prayers. No difference between the Amsi and the Amsa, the original and the portion, the expansion of the original. So Paramatma may accept that, hear the prayers and hymns of the Raganuga sadhakas. But Vishwanath himself replies to his own suggestion, if you will, or to our own suggestion for sure. It's not an option for him. And he said that will very much hurt the hearts of the sadhakas in Raga Bhakti, who are attached to Krishna, their particular stadep. So what's the solution to this dilemma? So then he quotes Uddhava in the Bhagavad, where Uddhava is expressing his bewilderment when Krishna approaches him asking for advice regarding what to do. He has 2 options: killing Jarasandha, going to the Rajasuya Yajna organized by Yudhishthira Maharaj, and Krishna himself is bewildered about what to do. And so he's asking, in this Mugdhata state, Mugdhata, remember, it meant bewildered. We have to remember these terms because they will be used along many verses. Sarvajñata means omniscient and more connected to the Aishwarya principle. Mugdhata meaning bewildered and more connected to the madhurya or intimate principle. So in this way, Uddhava will say in the Bhagavad, well, you are omniscient, I know you're omniscient, but you are at the same time acting as if bewildered, asking for advice from me. Even though you are beyond time, beyond space, you are full of knowledge, you can never be deluded, but at the same time, you are displaying this childlike unawareness or bewilderment, and at the same time being omniscient simultaneously. So all this is bewildering me. So this is happening in Dwarka, what is speaking Braj. We quoted one verse that Vishwanath will quote later from Kunti regarding the Damodar Lila in this regard as well. And then Vishwanath quotes further evidence coming also from Uddhava, when Uddhava mentions that, like addressing the possible argument to that point, which is some people may say, actually you act as if bewildered, but actually you are not perplexed, you are not bewildered, you're just acting, doing like a show of that. And also you appear to be bewildering me. Some may say that, and some may say, but actually I'm not really bewildered. But actually Uddhava says that's not the fact. Such explanation is not consistent. So the point is, because Vishwanath himself further presents more Purva Paksha to his own point. He say, well, Uddhava in other part, he say, you are without endeavor, yet you perform karma, you are unborn, yet you take birth. But at the same, he says, but that's a different context. He's saying that in a particular moment and situation and context. But at the same time, the other thing is there. Because if Krishna will really be making a show, that will be impossible for someone as wise, as enlightened as Uddhava to become bewildered because of that. And he was bewildered for sure. So Vishwanath concluded this first section saying that we should accept this mugdata or bewilderment in Krishna, this being innocently unaware in his Dwarka pastimes, despite the presence of Sarvajñata, which is prominent there. He's been omniscient there. But at the same time, he says similarly, in his Braja pastime, Vrindavan pastime, we also are obliged to acknowledge the Sarvajñata principle, Krishna's omniscience, which comes through his Achinta Shakti, or inconceivable potency, despite the presence of Mugdata. Even though in Krishna, overtly in Vrindavan, his Mugdata, Sarvajñata is there in the background. We will see that, of course, today and in other lectures. And he finishes this first section by quoting Lila Sukha, Bilwa Mangal Thakur, Krishna Karnamrita, verse 83, where he says the same thing. In all the pastimes, Bhagavan is simultaneously bewildered and omniscient. These two principles live together in him without contradiction. And therefore he says, Bilwa Mangal, we must accept this as being accomplished by his Achinta Shakti. So again, Krishna sometimes appears Mukta in Dwarka, even though he's prominently Sarvajñata there. But there's Mukta, and in Braj, even though he's prominently Muktata or bewildered, Sarvajñata is there in the backdrop. That's Vrindavan, as Jiva Goswami defines it, where all things are possible. Achinta Shakti. That's the perfection of his Achinta Shakti, to make the impossible possible. All contradictions harmonize in Krishna. Beauty, truth, and harmony, as Srila Maharaj would say. That's what we will find in the Krishna conception of Vrindavan. So all this, in one sense, is answering to the original question that Vishwanath presented regarding who will answer the prayers of the sadhakas. Well, Krishna remains in Vrindavan, being omniscient. So we could say, if we are sadhaka, we are not yet siddhas, we are raganuga sadhaka without much ruchi, without that much surrender, without that even proper conception yet. So we could say that his Sarvajñata side that remains in Braj will hear those prayers. He is omniscient, he will hear the prayers of his sadhakas. But when we become siddhas or perfected beings, we could say that his mugdata side will hear. And I won't say will hear our prayers. I will say we'll hear the chastisement coming from Jasoda, from the gopis. Devotees in Vrindavan won't be praying to Krishna as the sadhaka does, basically. So he will be hearing mainly from his bewildered side, having eyes and ears for that type of language. And regarding the sadhaka stage, if you will, that's in a general way to say, his omniscient side will be more connected to that. So the point is, there is hope for the raga sadhakas, and Krishna and Braj still, our prayers are not going in vain, basically. So this first verse actually is I'm making a brief recap of it, but the verse in itself is a summary of all of certain points that Vishwanath will unfold in the following verses. So that's why we didn't enter into further detail in it, because he will do that in the next prose verses. So let's continue with let's begin today with the second verse of prose. So I will share it with you in the chat section. So that's the first part. It says like this. So we could call this refutation of misconception. That's how Nantadas Pandit mentions the idea. And he gives some names to each verse regarding the gist of them. So it says like this. Someone may propose, one should understand the Sarvajñata, omniscience, here, one should understand that Sarvajñata, omniscience here, indicates an abundance of divine opulence, Aishwarya, devoid of sweetness, Madhurya, while the Muktata, bewildering, that results from completely setting aside opulence and imitating human-like behavior is simply Madhurya. Only dull-headed people speak like this. So Vishwanath is presenting further arguments, if you will, or further possibilities, ideas that different members of the audience may have, and maybe, as we were speaking in the previous lecture, opinions of the people at his time. So he's also at the same time trying to make it clear what's the proper conception of these conceptions, Muktata and Sarvajñata. So he starts mentioning this point. Like someone may say like, okay, Sarvajñata, omniscience, means it's full Aishwarya without any trace of Madhurya. And Muktata, or bewilderment, means totally free of Aishwarya. But Vishwanath says that's dull-headed people think like this. That's not a very intelligent Sumedha Saha argument. So here, again, Vishwanath is starting to unfold his actual main point that he wants to make. He began in the previous verse by presenting this question, who will hear the prayers of the Raga sadhakas, but with some intention in mind. So here is starting to become more and more clear. So the main point here is how Aishwarya, he wants to establish here, how Aishwarya, the element of Aishwarya is the foundation, if you will, of the Madhurya experience. It's there in the background. It's necessary for the intimate. Remember, Madhurya means intimate. We are not exclusively speaking here about romantic love, but about the sweetness and the intimacy we found in Braj. So in other words, he's trying to explain how without Aishwarya, there can be no Madhurya. There can be no perfection in Madhurya. As we find in Vrindavan. Vrindavan represents not only Madhurya in the sense of sweetness and intimacy, but the perfection of it. So the presence of Aishwarya, as we will see, grants this perfection. And also we could say, by emphasizing and stressing how Aishwarya is there in the background serving, if you will, the Madhurya element, that helps us to understand how this Madhurya, even though it seems ordinary, it's supra-transcendental, supra-mundane. Aprakrita, again, it seems prakrita, it seems material, mundane, but actually it's way above the adokshaya, or overtly transcendental plane. So these are points that our Acharya have tried to make along history, because as we know, the Krishna Lila, Braja Lila in particular, seems too close to our human experience, and it is in one level, but at the same time there is an important gap in the context of Aishwarya that we should consider, not to misunderstand one thing for the other. So here we are starting to unfold this idea of Aishwarya, Madhurya. From one side we have the Aishwarya in Bhagavan. Aishwarya can be translated as majesty, which majesty includes many things. For example, awareness of the divinity of the Godhead, knowledge of that divinity, the sense of I'm in front of God, with all that implies the conception of Bhagavan, full opulence, full majesty, full strength, full knowledge, full fame, full everything, full beauty, of course, as well. Krishna himself, in the Shrutis, is mentioned over and over again, especially Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, points this also when he says many things. One of them, Ham Sarvasya Prabhavu Mata Sarvam Pravartate. Ham Sarvasya Prabhavu. Everything is coming from me. I'm the source of everything. That's Aishwarya. Now imagine if you are with your friend and you suddenly realize he's the source of everything. That's Aishwarya. So that has to do also with the concept of tattva and siddhanta, of being educated and learning about the ontological position of Krishna as God. That's important for us as sadhakas. We should be properly informed about how Krishna is God, not only he's God and he's the supreme personality of God, but how he's so. All this education lends upon a foundation, a bedrock for the temple of Madhurya and sweetness and intimacy. And this very verse of the Bhagavad Gita, shows this in the last two lines. Iti matta bhajante mam bhuta vavas mambitaha, he says. This is the first verse of the Chaturshloki of the Gita. No? So the ones, Krishna said, I'm the source of everything. Everything comes from me. And those who acknowledge this, the result of that acknowledging is they will end up worshiping me with lots of love, sweetness, and intimacy. So in this verse, we find these two important points. Aishwarya, and how Aishwarya, by properly being they processed, will take to a certain type of madhurya or sweetness. In that same chapter later, Krishna also begins to describe his opulences. 10th chapter of the Gita is Vibhuti Yoga, or the yoga of Vibhuti. Vibhuti means like opulence also. And he almost concludes there by saying, whatever opulence you find in this world, whatever majesty, whatever sweetness, beauty, be for sure that that only represents but one spark of my splendor. So again, that's Aishwarya, pretty Aishwaric. Whatever you see beautiful, all the qualities of intelligent people, I'm intelligent, of the strong, I'm the strength. Whatever you see as a virtue, as a quality, is just a very minute indication of what's present in me. So that creates a sense of, that may create a distance, because you will realize he's so big, I'm so small, he's God, I'm not. So that has to do with Aishwarya. And eventually, what to speak, eventually in the Gita, in the 11th chapter, comes the Vishwarup Darshan, where Krishna is showing the universal form to Arjuna. We basically do not find anywhere else such a level of Aishwarya. That's pretty Aishwaric, thousands of heads and arms, and the Kala Rupa there, time form, devouring everything. And you see, of course, that Aishwarya. Arjuna's devotion is such that his bhakti, his friendship, his sakya with Krishna becomes diluted by that Aishwarya. He becomes aware of that, overtly aware of that. He starts to beg forgiveness, as you know. His Madhurya, the Madhurya side of his Puri Sambandhi, Sakya, his friendship as a city friend, goes totally to the background. Eventually, we will say this doesn't happen in Braj. But Krishna showing extreme Aishwarya, like lifting Govardhan or whatever, Brajavasis only see their own Madhurya increased in the face of that. So all these points Vishwanath is trying to make here, to make it clear the difference between Braja Lila, Madhurya Lila, Aishwarya Lila, Vaikuntha, Dwarka, all the different points that needs to be properly established for a Raganuga sadhaka to have a proper conception of the nature of the goal. So Aishwarya on that side, and on the other side we have the Madhurya component, which is also present in Bhagavan. Bhagavan is not only Aishwarya, Bhagavan is not only Madhurya, but actually the two of them are there. Different proportions according to the presentation of the Absolute, of course. Anantadas Pandit quotes a nice verse in this connection about from the Rig Veda, which is the most ancient non-Vedic text, which speaks in connection to God's Madhurya as experienced by the sages of all time. So it says like this, it says, we are the worshippers of the honey sweet God. May the wind carry honey for us. May the oceans exude honey. May the herbs be full of honey. May the day and the night, as well as the specks of earth, appear to us as honey filled. May the demigods who maintain the universe by showering water be filled with honey. May the trees be filled with honey. May the sun god shine with sweet rasa, and may the cows give us sweet juice. All of them are like honey, honey, honey. So we see the rishis here are honey-sized. So they're full of the perception of sweetness that comes everywhere. Raso, Vaisaha, Rasam Hivayam Lat Vanandi Bhavati. What to speak the Bhagavad and other rasic literature, even in the Rig Veda, we find this type of conception. The Vedas also say, Shrimbantu Vishvi Amritasya Putraha. O universe, here, all of you are sons of nectar. So Amrita has to do with nectar, has to do with immortality, but also with not only mere immortality, but as Srila Samaraj will say, positive and progressive immortality, which means sweet immortality, nectar-like immortality. That's also the ultimate meaning of Amrita. So here the Vedas say, Amritasya Putra, you are Putra, you are sons of the land of nectar. There is a land made of nectar waiting for you there. Oh, you, Vishve, oh, universe, the whole universe has to hear Shrimbantu, this news. So we also have this idea of extreme sweetness in the presence of the divine. So the idea here is, on one side, we speak of Bhagavan, God. He's a whole reservoir of majesty, Aishwarya, but also he's filled with intimacy with Madhurya in that context. In the context of being God, this is a complex theological point. We may just embrace that in a sentimental way and think that we love Krishna and we feel attracted to him, but all that can be in a more mental, sentimental platform as well. So it's important to understand what's the difference between Krishna's sweetness and any other type of sweetness that we see in this world. So Vishwanath will try to make that point eventually. So God is the source of all Aishwarya, but he's also filled with sweetness. So how these two elements fit together. So the point is, if he's full of sweetness, and in Vrindavan we see that as Krishna, but the Aishwarya is there. So the idea that follows is that for real Madhurya, or the perfection of Madhurya, which has to be in relation to Sri Krishna in Braj, for the perfection of Madhurya to be accomplished, that has to do with the experience of Aishwarya. You cannot experience the fullness of Madhurya without experiencing Aishwarya in some way or another, in the sense of that has to be there present. And mostly for us as sadhakas, as we'll see, we have to go through that filter first. We have to know Krishna is God, so eventually we can forget that fact and see him in terms of certain type of Madhurya or intimacy. He's my friend, he's the lover of my Swamini, he's whatever, my little darling, depending the affinity. So the point that Vishwanath wants to make here is, who are the dual-headed people that he refers to here? Those who think that Madhurya, sweetness, basically cannot be accomplished within the framework of great majesty and omniscience. You can have Madhurya outside that. They think, no, Madhurya is only imitation of human pastimes. Madhurya, like my baby's, he will give that example next verse. Oh, so sweet, my baby. Krishna is so sweet also, like him. That's not the same. That's not Madhurya, strictly speaking. Madhurya doesn't only mean imitation of human pastimes. When we speak about Nara Lila of Krishna, as Guru Maharaj will say, human-like. Important, the two of them are important words. So it's not proper to conclude Madhurya means complete bewilderment, complete mugdata, without any sign of Aishwarya. That's Madhurya. No, Aishwarya has to be there present in the background, like given the warranty that this is real Madhurya. And again, this is also connected to our situation as sadhakas, that we first need to go through the knowledge of God's Godhood. His Aishwarya, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, for example. And then we will be able to eventually forget all that and reach the plane of Gyan Sunya Bhakti, for example. Bhakti devoid of any knowledge, even the knowledge of Krishna is God. That's the point when Ramananda mentioned that Vishnu Mahaprabhu became so excited. Oh, this is going somewhere now in our sambat, in our conversation. When he started to speak about the goal of life, Mahaprabhu rejected so many opportunities he was given. Even Sarvadharmam Parityaja, Brahma Bhuta Prashanatman, so many other things. But when he said Gyam Prayasudapasyanamanta Eva, he quoted Brahma saying, reject totally every type of gyan, even the idea that Krishna is God. Oh, Mahaprabhu said, we are going somewhere now. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj will call this type of bhakti, Gyan Sunya Bhakti, brain dead bhakti. But before practicing brain dead bhakti, we have to engage our brain properly. We have to use our head to soften our heart. When the heart is softened, as Guru Maharaj said the other day in Radhastami lecture, head is not necessary any longer. It has been used properly, it has reached its limit, the heart is fully awake, and everything will come through revelation, mercy, through the channel of the heart, if you will. But if this is not enough, for further clarifying of this point, next Vishwanath in this same, in the next verse, sorry, now we will enter into the third verse. Next Vishwanath will define the characteristics of both Madhurya and Aishwarya. Today we will mainly concentrate on Madhurya, of what Vishwanath says about Madhurya. So let's go to the third verse or prose, which is basically a definition of Madhurya, what's sweetness about. So there are shared in the chat the verse. So I'll share this is the first part of it. We will share some few parts. So it says like this. Now, the characteristics of sweetness, Madhurya, are defined. Sweetness is there when the mood of human pastimes is not transgressed, even slightly, regardless of whether Krishna shows his divine opulence or not. For example, when baby Krishna sucked out the life air of the witch Putana, he was in the mood of a human child while sucking her breast. Although Sri Krishna smashed the very cruel and hard-hearted cart demon Sakatasura, he did so by kicking it with his very tender foot soles, while manifesting himself in the mood of a human baby of only 3 months of age, lying flat on his back. Even when Yashoda could not bind him with the longest rope, Krishna appeared completely perturbed, out of fear of her. Although he bewildered Lord Brahma and Baladev by showing innumerable Vishnu expansions of himself in the Brahma Vimohan Leela, Krishna was seen tending the cows and calves just like an ordinary human boy, even while personally remaining omniscient. So Vishwanath starts to make his point further and further more, in clearer and clearer way. Give an example from Shastra, will say, and after he rejected the wrong interpretation of what's Madhurya, he's giving the proper meaning here. He's giving the proper meaning, mentioning that when the human pastimes are not transgressed even slightly, even though there is Aishwarya or not there, in an overt way, that's the point, that's Madhurya. So of course, he will give some examples and we will go through them now. So this is interestingly very connected to the important statement that is so central to us Gaudiya Vaishnavas and is so central thus to the Bhagavat, which is Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam, as Guru Maharaj will define as the password for accessing Krishna Lila. If we are, as Raga Sadhakas, we are projecting ourselves into the entrance there, we need to know the password. Now if you are not able to have the password to enter this meeting today, you will be not able to access to the lecture. So the same idea. You want to enter Vrindavan, they will ask, please share the password here. So if you don't know what to put there, it's not just putting words, it's having full insight and realization of that. Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, what's all that it means? Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, when you reach the full implication of that, you will find yourself in the Golok. So the reason actually why Krishna is called Swayam Bhagavan in the Bhagavad, which is another way of saying Supreme Personality of Godhead, that Prabhupada put it, is because this fact. Why he's not only Bhagavan. Bhagavan has more to do with opulence, generally. Generally is translated as the possessor of all opulence. That's more connected with Aishwarya. But Swayam has to do with himself, when he wants to be himself. Bhagavad Gita cites Bhagavan as he is. So Swayam Bhagavan, the very term Swayam Bhagavan includes these two ideas of Madhurya and Aishwarya. And the point is, Krishna, especially Krishna Vrindavan, is called Swayam Bhagavan in the Bhagavad. Why? Because he's simultaneously displaying both matchless Madhurya and Aishwarya during his Leela. And to illustrate this is that Vishwanath shares the examples that he has given. And he's not only showing Madhurya without Aishwarya, he's not only showing Aishwarya without Madhurya, but the two of them in the highest possible degree. That's an interesting point. In Vrindavan, you will find the highest possible Madhurya, but also the highest possible Aishwarya, as we will see in some of the examples mentioned, even beyond Vaikuntha. Mm-hmm. So here we have Swayam Bhagavan, the original form of the Godhead. We have that, sometimes that's called the Amsi. We already spoke about that last class. The Amsi, the original form, and the Amsas are like the derivative form, like not the original, but expansions or particles or parts or forms. So in that sense, we may speak in terms of Swayam Bhagavan and Bhagavan. There are many forms of Bhagavan, Vishnu, Narayan, Varaha, Ram, Kurma, Nrsimha, but Swayam Bhagavan, the source, the fountainhead of all expressions of divinity, all phases of the Godhead, that's Sri Krishna Vrindavan. So interestingly also, something that is mentioned is that the difference between Ams and Amsi sometimes is expressed according to the display of Aishwarya. So the point is, if Krishna is the source of all forms, it means he's displaying the most Aishwarya, even though it seems he's displaying the more Madhurya, and that's happening also at the same time. And that's why in the Bhagavad, Sri Krishna has been established as the Amsi, if you will, as the original source form of all forms of God. And that's the point is that implies in him resides the greatest Aishwarya. And this has been said in this crucial statement on the Bhagavad that is also called by the Goswamis the Paribhasa Sutra, or that few sutra-like line, that thread-like line, like aphorism-like, around which all the text revolves, around which all the other statements of the scripture should seen in context in relation to. Actually, Srila Jiva Goswami, as you may know, he made a whole treatise on the basis of this one line, his Krishna Sandarbha. It's revolving around this idea, how Krishna is not only Bhagavan, but Swayam Bhagavan. So Paribhasa Sutra has that potency. It's only one line. It's mentioned only once in the entire book. You may say you are making too much of it. Jiva Goswami wrote the whole treatise, but explained why that only line is so important, and so many other statements are regulated by such Paribhas. So that's the conception of Paribhasa Sutra, revealing again the ultimate conclusion of the Bhagavad. It's a full independent statement, if you will, and all the other statements are considered like handmaidens of the Paribhasa Sutra. Everything else that the Bhagavatam is saying is serving what this line represents, implies. Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna is God, what God wants to be himself, as he is. This line sometimes is compared, the example is like the great king, like conquering over all the other different verses, all the other different statements, and establishing its supremacy. And Jiva Goswami is showing again how this is going on by writing a whole treatise for that. So what does it say again? Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna, as Prabhupada will put it, or Braja Krishna, let's put Braja there because we are speaking about a particular type of Krishna. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we'll say Supreme. Interestingly, I will, if we want, we already connect Swayam Bhagavan to these two ideas. Not Swayam with Madhurya, he himself when he wants to be himself, and Bhagavan with Aishwarya, the possessor of all majesty and opulence. But analyzing how Prabhupada framed it, Supreme Personality, Godhead, these three words. Of course, Godhead speaks about Aishwarya, Godhead, the Supreme, the God. But Supreme, actually, interestingly, if you go to the etymology of the word, Supreme, at least in Spanish we say in the same way, Supremo or Suprema here. So Prema, I think you know what does it mean, Prem. And Su in Sanskrit also speaks about something, Sudurlabha, very rare. So Supreme will mean very Prem-like, very Premika. So we could connect Supreme, even though it's generally connected to Aishwarya, about how it translates for us in Spanish or English. We go to the etymology of the word in connection to Sanskrit, Supreme. We'll speak about the very special type of Prem, which is well, the Prem Madhurya that we find in Braj makes Krishna who he is. And personality, supreme personality, personality also is connected to Madhurya. A particular side of him as he is, as he presents with full informality in Braj. Barefoot, the god of informality, basically, that's the idea. And Godhead has to do more with Aishwarya. So the point is, both of them, Aishwarya and Madhurya, are present in Braja Krishna more, both Aishwarya, both Madhurya, both present in him more than in any other form of divinity. And that makes for Swayam Bhagavan, Supreme Personality of Godhead, the source of all other forms. And so Prabhupada spoke about this over and over again, as Guru Maharaj always mentioned. Krishna as he is, we will say, in the terms of Prabhupada, as he presented Prabhupada, Bhagavad Gita as it is, Swayam Bhagavan and Krishna as he is. And Guru Maharaj once said also, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj focused from another point of view of Krishna as the lover of the gopis, Krishna as he feels. Of course, as he is and as he feels actually are synonymous, but they are different approaches to this very same personality. Guru Maharaj let me share some things that Guru Maharaj mentioned, this connection about this tension between Aishwarya and Madhurya and how Prabhupada presented that. For example, he once spoke, Prabhupada gave names, very particular name to certain deities, like Radha London Ishwar or Radha Paris Ishwar. Ishwar has to do in one level with, interestingly, the word Ishwar is used both in Madhurya sense and in Aishwarya. Ishwar means like controller or like master. But also it can have an application in Vrindavan, Ishwari, Brajeshwar, Srinandan, Maharaj, and so on. So Prabhupada, but he gave the name rather London Ishwara. Krishna is the controller of London. So that may seem more like, one may say, well, that's only a preaching strategy. Well, of course, some preaching strategy may have been there in his mind, but there are so many other things to consider. He wanted, Guru Maharaj will say, he wanted the people of the world to know that Krishna was the Adidev on one side, the original all-powerful God, Aishwarya, but also Deva. Deva not only means God, but as you know, Deva comes from the root Dev, which has to do with play. So Deva means playful. He's the playful lover of Radha as well, the playful friend of Sridham Subal. And as Guru Maharaj will say, we need power to play. So play has to do with Madhurya, but play implies Aishwarya. Leela requires Aishwarya. Leela, play requires power, again. So we see how these two terms interact with each other. So when Guru Maharaj will name the deities London Ishwar, Guru Maharaj say once, in that sense, Krishna should be understood first as the Lord of London. He's a real master, not the queen, not whoever. So that's Aishwaric. But eventually, by properly doing so, he intended, he will be eventually known as the Brit's own Krishna. He's our Krishna here in London, implying sense of mamata. Mamata has to do with a very important ingredient of prem. Mamata means possessiveness. No? Sorry. Possessiveness in the realm of love. So you love someone, you will feel that person is my friend, my son, my love. There is a sense of I, me, mine, but not the hammameti of material world, the sense of possessiveness here, false sense of it. So Guru Maharaj will say, by that, Prabhupada had that in mind. First, they have to know him. He's the Lord of the world. He's the Lord of the city of London. But eventually, he's our Krishna. And someone asked Guru Maharaj after that, and what about the names that Prabhupada gave to deities in New Delhi? Raga-vartma-candrika. Someone suggested that it was a proper mixing of mellows, if you will, rasa-vas. But Guru Maharaj also explained that interestingly in the context of Madhurya, Aishwarya, and how they appear according to what these names represent. So in this case, we have Parthasarathi, which means the how do you say in English? Charioteer of Arjun, the driver of Arjun in the chariot. So Krishna is sitting there on the Arjuna's chariot speaking, but as we know, as Guru Maharaj himself made that clear in the Bhagavad Gita commentary, while he's speaking, for example, certain section of the Gita, like the Chaturshloki of the Gita, he may be, his mind will be flying to Braj in the ultimate sense of that. he will remember the parakia of the gopis. Jena manupayantite, upapati, parakia of the gopis. And Sri Dasidhar Maharaj also commented like that. And even other Gaudiya acharyas like Srila Narayan Maharaj also, they found Rajendra Nandan Krishna in the Gita. He, for example, comments on verse 934, which is considered by the most important verse of the Gita, Man mana bhava mad bhakto, which Krishna repeats at the end of the Gita. Always thinking of me, basically. Man mana, topmost instruction, fall in love with me. Narayan Maharaj, he says in a condensed form, this verse of the Gita is showing how to tame Braja Bhakti. This is the essence of the Gita, he says. So again, it's part of Sarati Krishna, but he's directing us to Braj, to Radha Dasyam, and to all the other types of dasya, if you will, of servanthood found there. And in that context, the person who asked this to Guru Maharaj, they thought, okay, I agree, in the Gita, Partha Sarati may be directing us to the service of Sri Radha and Vrindavan, but still Partha Sarati is Partha Sarati. He's not Shyam Sundar Krishna. And we know, for example, that when Sri Radha was in Kurukshetra and he saw Krishna, Dwarkadish Krishna, she wanted to take him to Vrindavan because she could not serve him in that particular situation. So the point is how Srimati Radharani can enjoy with Partha Sarati Krishna on the altar. And going back to the idea that Prabhupada installed them on the altar. So the altar, as you know, is a portal to a particular reality that represents something, ongoing thing. So Guru Maharaj also there say, well, Radha can only stand next to him and call him back to Vrindavan, stripping him out of his Aishwarya and penetrating his heart. He said that was she did at Kurukshetra. She brought like the flute player out from beneath his, Guru Maharaj will say, his princely attire, and he exposed his heart to the point that Krishna had to confess, my heart is only yours. I do not belong to anyone else, even though it seems so. I only belong to you. So the point is, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur will say, serving Sri Radha at that moment of necessity bring much remuneration. So maybe Guru Maharaj suggested this is what Prabhupada had in mind when he named the deities Radha Partha Sarati. So we know the point is there is place for contemplating the Aishwarya in such a way in play with Madhurya that it increases the experience of Madhurya eventually. That's how a Gaudiya the psychology of the Gaudiya always will converge in that direction. So the idea is this: now we can find in Sri Krishna the topmost manifestation of Aishwarya and Madhurya in his Braja Lila. His Braja Lila, which is human-like and is considered in the scriptures like topmost of all Lilas. And Krishna Das Kaviraj quotes a very nice verse about this. He says, Krishna Raja Tikka Kila Sarvotama Nara Lila Narabaputa Hara Sarupa Gopa Vishya Beno Kara Nava Kishar Natavara Nava Lila Ayanurupa. So it says Krishna Raja Tikka Kila Sarvotam Nara Lila. This Nara Lila of Sri Krishna is the Sarvotam, the highest of all Lilas. Narabapu Tahara Sarup, when he appears in his very ultimate identity, human-like form. Gopavesh, dressed as a cowherd boy. Gopavesh, Benukar, flute in hand. Navakishore, eternally youthful. Natavara, the king of all dancers. Nara Lila Hayanurup. This Nara Lila is supremely enchanting. So Krishna Lila is Nara Lila. Nara Lila means human-like Lila. So Guru Maharaj will say these two words are very important. Human, which implies Madhurya, sweetness, intimacy, but like, human-like. Like means Aishwarya, which means it's not fully human. It's human, fully human in one sense, but it's very full Aishwarya at the same time. So the two words are equally important, not only human, not only like, not only Madhurya, not only Aishwarya. One will allow for the experience of the other. So in our case, that we are after the Madhurya Lila, the intimacy of Braj, it's important to give Aishwarya its proper regard because that will facilitate the actual experience of Madhurya. So in this connection, going back for a minute to this Paribhas Sutra of the Bhagavatam, Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam, actually, we shouldn't say only Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam, but again, Braja Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam. when the Bhagavatam is saying Krishna is the original Godhead, the supreme form of the divine, he's referring not to Dwarka Krishna, to Mathura Krishna, to Kurukshetra Krishna, to Hastinapur Krishna, but Braja Krishna. Rupa Goswami mentioned this point in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, when he described Krishna in these different features in the Golok. When Krishna appears in Dwarka, he's considered Purna, complete. When he goes to Mathura, he's Purnatara, he's more complete than in Dwarka. But Krishna in Vrindavan, Braja Krishna, he's Purnatama, the highest, most complete form of the Absolute. So this is the gradation in the Golok. Of course, we can extend that to other realms. For example, when we go to Vaikuntha, and we won't find Krishna, strictly speaking there, we'll find Narayan, Vishnu. And that's a realm entirely dominated by Aishwarya. In this case, we are speaking about Aishwarya with now tinge of Madhurya. And there are, of course, devotees who are attracted by that. And there is something to be, for their case to be made, of course. So in Vaikuntha, we find Vaikuntha is entirely dominated by Aishwarya. A little higher, we can speak of Ayodhya or Dwarka, which is similar, which is predominated by Aishwarya. There's awareness, Krishna is God, but there's a touch of Madhurya in Dwarka, and difference than Vaikuntha. In Dwarka, Krishna will have family members, different types of relationship. In Vaikuntha, there's nothing like that. So Vaikuntha entirely dominated by Aishwarya. Dwarka predominated by Aishwarya, but with a touch of Madhurya. Mathura is predominated by Madhurya, but with certain Aishwarya. Vasudev Devaki, we will see their example for moments, being aware of Krishna's Godhood. And Vrindavan is entirely dominated by Madhurya. So you may say, okay, so there's no Aishwarya. No, there's full Aishwarya also. Because the point is, for Madhurya to be there has to be Aishwarya, supporting, if you will, that. But Madhurya, the point is, in Vrindavan, there will be even more Aishwarya than in Vaikuntha, but it won't be overtly present, operative there. It will be like a backdrop. It will be buried under layers and layers of intimacy, of sweetness, of Madhurya. So that's a unique constitution of Sri Brajadam. So on one side, we have the pastimes that are just filled with Aishwarya, like Vaikuntha Lila, if you will. Awe and reverence is the natural response to that will arise, and sweetness won't be relished in Vaikuntha. That was the problem with Gopakumar being there, if you will. But again, and on the other side, if we go to the other extreme, from only Aishwarya and Vaikuntha, if we want only Madhurya without Aishwarya, actually that's not Madhurya, that's a so-called Madhurya. And that will actually mean ordinary human so-called pastimes. Transcendence will be lost. If we only want Madhurya without Aishwarya, transcendence will be lost. We will have only a mundane event. So in this connection, Ananta Das Pandit comments in his commentary to this verse that wherever the godlike feelings and the human-like feelings keep each other in honor and continue creating all kinds of amazing flavors, taking shelter of opposing natures, there the flavors of sweet pastimes can be truly relished. In other words, that was Naralila means. The godlike feelings, if you will, Aishwarya, human-like feelings, Madhurya, honor each other, and between the two together create new, wonderful chamatkar, adbhuta pastimes, amazing pastimes, taking shelter of opposing natures but fully harmonized in the context of Achintya Shakti. And Vishwanath, that's why Vishwanath again defines Madhurya here in this way. He's saying Aishwarya may or may not be manifest, remember, he's saying that, but when the feelings of the human-like pastimes are not even slightly violated, that's called Madhurya. Of course, Aishwarya will be in the background again, but sometimes one will be manifest, as I said, in the case of Govardhan, overtly there is Aishwarya, even though for the Brajavasis, Madhurya is increasing. But in most cases, Aishwarya may not be even overtly manifest, even though presence in the background. So let's finish the lecture by sharing some of the examples that Vishwanath have shared in this section. Many famous examples, all of them coming from the Braja Lila. Right? Again, we are speaking about Raganuga Bhakti here. So he's trying to make sure that we are properly understanding the nature and psychology of that place by quoting proper things, by contrasting them with other elements as well. So he begins with the killing of Putana, which is one of the main very first Leelas in Krishna's life, almost some days after he was born. So as we know, I won't enter into the details of the narrative of each Leela of this, but as you know, Putana dressed herself as a devotee. She put some like killing poison on her breast and entered into the house like a Lakshmi for all the Brajavasis and took Krishna on her lap and gave her breast to so-called give so-called milk to him. And baby Krishna just a few days began to suck Putana's breath, but began to suck her pran as well, his alive air. But he started to do that like an ordinary baby. So Madhurya component. The point is, in these Leelas, we have to appreciate how both Madhurya and Aishwarya are playing out, interacting between themselves. So Krishna acts mugdata, like bewildered, like ordinary baby, with full, in the context of Madhurya, of sweetness. So he just innocently began to suck. But again, his godly power for destroying the demons, the Vishnu within himself, that's Aishwarya, Sarvajñata, that killed Putana. It is said that Krishna never has nothing to do with killing demons, but the Vishnu portion within himself, Vishnu is a portion of Krishna, does that work. That's the work of Vishnu. Krishna is just Leela Purushottam. So again, even though that killed Putana, that did not even slightly transgress Krishna's bewildered baby pastimes, if you will. At the end, as you know, he killed that. I mean, the Vishnu within himself killed Putana. Putana showed her giant, miles distance, demoness body. And Krishna was just found playing on her huge body like a mountain. He was just like walking and totally bewildered again when the Brajavas found him there. So again, we have the Madhurya element there. And then we have the famous pastime of Sakatasura, which was there with Krishna was like 3 months. So just some few weeks after this Putana Lila. And there Krishna was lying on a cradle under a great cart, as you know. And Sakatasura was a demon in the form of the cart. And so he tried to crush Krishna under the cart baby. But Krishna was, to say that, again, Krishna was as an ordinary baby, Madhurya, but he was omniscient, knowing which was the plan of the demon. So that's his Aishwarya, omniscience, Sarvajñata. So he began to cry at that moment. And he began to kick around with his arms, with his legs, in the mood of an ordinary baby, because apparently he wanted milk from Yashoda. And he wanted, actually, it's not apparently. So that's again Madhurya. The baby wants milk from the mother, he starts crying. That's not Aishwarya. But omniscience was playing out in that context. Because it is said that after his little toes, the toes of the feet touched the huge cart, tried to get the contrast, 3-month-old baby touching with the tip of the tongue, the toes, the cart, the whole cart fell apart. That's Aishwarya. And the great demon was killed without anyone saying that. So this is how Aishwarya Madhurya is playing out. Another Leela that is shared, all this in the context of Krishna's Kumar age. So revolving around the Vatsalya sensibilities, here we have the Damodar Leela, the famous Damodar Leela in this connection, when Yashoda is trying to bind Krishna with a very long rope. And this is a context of Madhurya. Remember, Yashoda paying attention to the milk, as we spoke some classes before, Krishna crying, not happy with that, breaking yogurt pots, running here and there, doing some mischief. Yashoda running, trying to capture him because she feels, so maybe my son will leave home and won't be back again. So that's all in the context of Madhurya. But when she tries to bind Krishna, every time she tried, the rope was 2 fingers short. So that started to create some other type of bewilderment in Yashoda. And it is said that in Krishna's waist, he has one Aishwarya Shakti or Vibhuti Shakti became manifest and made it impossible for her to tie that. So that's Aishwarya. You cannot, even though you bring more and more and more rope. But again, because of the influence of Krishna's Achintya Shakti, eventually Krishna was bound with a string instead of weight bells. So apparently ordinary. So Krishna was describing these two sides. Aishwarya, by being endless on one side, no rope was enough. But at the same time, he was able to be, he was tied by Jasoda eventually. And when he was tied eventually, at one point, he, in the context of the Lila, even before being tied, and what to speak after, he began to cry out of fear of Jashoda's punishment. So again, that's Madhurya. Krishna is the all absolute, everyone is in fear of him, fear personified, runs from where he is, but he himself showed fear to Yashoda. That's what bewildered Kunti in the verse we quoted last class. And finally, in this section, Vishwanath is quoting the famous Brahma Vimohan Lila, which is a very important section of the Bhagavad that showcases this point. Brahmaji there becomes Bimohan, not only Mohan, but Bimohan, super bewildered by Krishna's Maya, that's Aishwarya, basically. And at the same time, at this moment, Krishna was, I won't tell the whole story, he tried to kidnap Krishna's cubs and friends and so on. He was not able to recognize his guru as he saw him in the beginning of creation. So he becomes totally bewildered when he sees, well, we will see how he becomes bewildered, his forehead spinning. But Krishna at one point starts to look for his friends and for the cubs, wandering from forest to forest. Where are you? Where are you? Apparently not knowing where they are. So showing the mugdata, his bewildered side, connected to Madhurya principle. But again, on the strength of his omniscience, Sarprajnata, Aishwarya, he understood, oh, this is the work of Brahma. So he assumes, the forms of all the innumerable cubs and friends. He expanded himself, took their forms. That's Aishwarya for sure, for a whole year. And for that whole year, he was relishing the Vatsalya of the cows that wanted to have Krishna as their calf, and the Vatsalya of the mothers and fathers of Vrindavan that want to have Krishna as their son. So again, we go back to Madhurya. And at the end of the pastime, after this year was passing, even Baladev, which is Krishna's other side, if you will, non-different from him, he was bewildered. Then he would have a mugdata of Baladev because of Krishna's Aishwarya. Because he was seeing, oh, these mothers are loving their sons more than ever, and the cows in the same way. What's going on here? But at the same time, there was the Go Charana Lila, the cowherd pastime. So there was some Madhurya in that context. So here we have great sweetness, which were not like transgressing the Nara Lila basically, but at the same time was a simultaneous manifestation of extreme Aishwarya. As Guru Maharaj will say, in the Brahma Vimohan Lila, we will find more Aishwarya than any other part of the Bhagavad. Eventually, what millions of Narayans expand from Krishna himself, and Brahma's heads are just going crazy. But so much Madhurya. All this Aishwarya for the Brajavas is facilitating so much Madhurya at the same time, and showcases itself for people from outside the Brajas Brahma. So all people who actually Brahma wanted to enter the Brajas, he wanted Sakya. So, but he was not able to understand what was going on in Braj. So Krishna showed him Aishwarya, overt Aishwarya, extreme Aishwarya, but in the context of helping him to eventually enter Madhurya of Braj, and he did, as being born as Haridas in Borlila and so on. So before finishing, give me 2 more minutes, because there is a brief section of this third prose of verse that is remaining. So I will share this with you. We will read that. And this is how Vishwanath closes the third verse, quoting one more example and making a recap of his idea. So he says, moreover, even though Krishna's great opulence, Aishwarya, is present when he is performing the pastimes of stealing milk and yogurt and acting lustily toward enchanting young cowherd maidens, that Aishwarya is not apparent. If the Lord's Muktata were to be called Madhurya, simply because without displaying any divine opulence, it corresponds with human activities, then the Muktata shown by any ordinary restless and playful child will also have to be called Madhurya. Therefore, it is completely wrong to explain Madhurya in this way. So here Vishwanath continues to pound the post in trying to make his case from different vantage point of views and sharing different leelas, but trying to make this point clear. For Madhurya to be there, Aishwarya will be there in the background, even though it is apparent, overtly present or not. So here is quoting some other Kumar Leela, Nocti childhood pastimes, exploits, where Krishna is going from house to house with his friends to steal makan, butter and yogurt, and eventually in his Kishore Lila, in his adolescence, where he's showing excessive attachment to the gopis, not only stealing and butter and yogurt, but the closest to the gopis, Vastraharana, their hearts. So externally showing himself again, totally ordinary. And no Aishwarya was manifest during these Leelas, no different. Especially Madhurya Rasa, that will be there. Even though we will see some Aishwaryas, we will see eventually in other sections, in Rasa Leela, Krishna expanding himself. But again, even though the point is, now he's given examples where the Aishwarya is not overtly present. Before he gave some examples where the Aishwarya was overtly present, with Putana, Shakatasur, Brahma Vimohan Leela. But here he says it's not present overtly, but for sure Aishwarya must be there because it's Madhurya there, real Madhurya there, so Aishwarya must be there. Aishwarya is also his natural, innate property. Guru Maharaj was saying that the other day on Radhastami. He was speaking about Radha's love and her Madhurya, but also say, well, her love is controlling God himself. So what can be more Aishwarya than that? God is being put under control by her love. So her love is the highest Madhurya, but also implies the highest Aishwarya, where the Godhead himself is becoming a puppet in her hands. So we have the highest Madhurya, but also the highest Aishwarya. And as we know, even if Krishna wants to show Aishwarya with the gopis, like the past time he showed the 4 arms and gopis were looking for Krishna's separation, they saw 4-armed Narayan. Say, oh Narayan, you are God, you're a mission, you're Sarvajñata. Can you please tell us, give us the GPS, where is Krishna now? And Krishna's Narayan was not able to speak, he was dumbfounded, he was Mugdata. And eventually Radha appeared and the force of her love made him take his Murlidhar pose. He was carved by her love. So in this way, Vishwanath concludes by sharing these points and trying to establish, even though Aishwarya may be overtly present or not, that's in the background and that what allows the Madhurya experience. So in this way, Vishwanath concludes this third verse, also again, by contrasting it with the human pastimes, not the human life, but the human pastimes, if we can call them pastimes, in the context at least of Srishti Leela. But he said that if purely human pastime full of mugdata, of bewilderment, and without any display of Aishwarya and any presence of Aishwarya whatsoever, that will be to be called Madhurya. Then we could say, well, the ignorance of an ordinary boy, playful child, naughty child, that will be also called Madhurya. So what's the difference between my children, my baby, being so cute? For sure you will feel like that if you're a mother, but what's the difference of Krishna being a baby? Well, the difference is that Krishna is God. And even though he's God, he's presenting himself like that due to the love that makes him like this. So that's the difference. So in other words, the conclusion of Vishwanath, of course, here, while speaking on Madhurya, is that without Aishwarya, Madhurya cannot be Madhurya. And especially all this, the Madhurya of Braj, it cannot be fully accomplished in Krishna Lila. So I hope that point is clear, because Vishwanath is taking his time to trying to make that really clear for us. So with this, I will end my presentation here today. And of course, we have some few minutes, so if someone may have any question, you can present it. You can unmute yourself and you can present your question.
Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes.
Just to clarify my own understanding,
yes.
One of the heads of the Sri Sampradaya came to a temple a few years ago for Janmashtami and gave a beautiful class. It was very nice. And then he invited a few devotees to their Janmashtami program, which was the next night, according to their calculations. So we went, and it was quite astounding. They chanted the Vishnu Sahasranam, and you know, it was very, very beautiful, very different from what we do, but very beautiful. And at the end of the night, like when we got to midnight, nobody saw this deity until midnight. We all went downstairs where he was worshiping the deity.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, it was obvious, it was very apparent that he had great, great devotion
Mm-hmm.
for the deity.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a beautiful ceremony, but it was very different. And my question is, so they've got love for Krishna,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no Madhurya, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really hard to imagine. And like in Vaikuntha, Narayan will sometimes show, just as oh, yeah, he's got a form like this. So they're not experiencing Madhurya. Is that correct?
No, I mean, the point is, there's no experience of Madhurya in connection to Narayan in Vaikuntha.
Uh-huh.
So a Sri Vaishnav, this is a famous example similar to what you told, where Maharashi mentions his example when they visited with Narasimha Maharaj, when Sri Vaishnav in South India, and they were speaking Hari Katha, Krishna Katha, and the Sri Vaishnav was like melting by hearing that. No, totally saturated. So he had an experience of Madhurya in relation to Krishna, because, I mean, you cannot but do that. But Guru Maharaj said, okay, I have one question. When Narasimha Maharaj said that when we speak about Krishna, you feel so much like jolly and charmed. And he said, yes, of course, Krishna is so sweet. But when I say Narayan, and Guru Maharaj will say that he immediately entered into another dimension. He entered he said, that's another thing. He entered into Vaikuntha. No? And Guru Maharaj will say, at that moment I saw a Vaikuntha man, because he was a man from Vaikuntha. So they worship Krishna, but they consider, of course, Krishna as an avatar of Narayan, and an avatar that performs certain particular leelas in certain mood. And of course, I mean, it's overt clear that the mood of Krishna is connected with sweetness and charm, and they will express that. But again, that's not their ultimate projection in transcendence. They will serve Narayan, Vishnu in Aishwarya Bhav, if you will, in the Dasya of Vaikuntha. But I'm not saying that. That's the point. No? Krishna is so charming and so full of Madhurya that even a Sri Vaishnava that worships Vishnu, when they will worship Krishna, they will express that, because that's the way to relate with him, even though that's not their sthai bhav, if you will. That's not the projection. It's the same way that if we let's invert, you say, the situation. If you go and visit the Sri Vaishnava temple, I've gone, for example, in Vrindavan, it's the Rangaji temple. In Vrindavan, there are temples of the Sri Sampradaya, and they worship in the deity in awe and reverence, what we may call. And that's nice. I mean, it's not that, I feel uncomfortable, I want to live there. Of course, I feel there's a very clear difference here. That's not my mood, but I appreciate that possibility, if you will. No? As we will say, you see other people in other traditions, you will say, oh, how interesting how they are worshiping my Krishna. No? That will be the idea. Oh, they worship Ram in this way, they worship Jesus, they worship Allah, whoever. Oh, okay, that's my Krishna. No? Your subjective idea is my Krishna, that I choose to worship him, but there's place for so many other feelings. But yeah, I think, I don't know if that helped regarding your question.
It does. Yeah, that helped a lot. Thank you very much. That was my experience too when I went there. It was like, oh, wow, this is different. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
But it wasn't our mood.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to be capable enough to appreciate that, and not to be offensive and fundamentalist. And that's the point that I always quote when Sanatana Goswami narrates Gopakumar's journey, and he goes to Ajodhya and he meets Hanuman. And so he says to Hanuman, Gopakumar, he doesn't say to Hanuman, hey, you are a Ram Bhakta and I am a Braja Bhakta in Sakya Bhav. Sit down and hear my instruction. I will show you a higher prospect. He's not saying that. Gopakumar says to Hanuman, please chant the glories of your Prabhu, of your Lord. So Sri Hanuman starts to glorify Ramachandra. And at the end, Gopakumar hears that and says, Jai Madan Gopal. Because he understands we are speaking about the same person. In Tattva, that's the same. That's what Venkata Bhatta said to Mahaprabhu in South India. Mahaprabhu said, why are you why Lakshmi left Narayan and want to be with Krishna? And Venkata said, well, it's the same person, Krishna and Narayan. We are in Tattva, they are the same. So, and then Hanuman said to Gopakumar, please chant the glories of your Prabhu, of Krishna, Madan Gopal. So Gopakumar starts to glorify Madan Gopal, and at the end Hanuman says, Jai Sri Ram. No? So that's the type of interreligious experience we should have, and the type of maturity and understanding of the tattva. No? Foundationally speaking, it's the same person, but according to Bhav, there are places for expressions and moods, and if that's in a proper context, that's to be celebrated. All differences that appear in the context of Siddhanta are to be celebrated, not to create a problem for any of us. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, so Regupal, you have a question?
Dandavat Maharaj. Dandavat. I have a question as well.
Yes.
It's about the definition of Madhurya that Vishwanath Chakravarti is giving us. He's saying that Madhurya is there when the mood of human pastimes is never violated, regardless of whether Krishna shows his Aishwarya or not. To me, it seems to be a very difficult to use definition. Like, for example, some of the examples that he's giving, like the story of Putana. How is that not breaking the mood of a human pastime? Like, when do you see a newborn child sucking out the life of a person? So that seems to be dependent very much on what you mean by the mood of human pastimes.
Yeah.
But as you explained it, then I'm sorry, I'll just finish it.
No, sorry.
As you explained it, Maharaj, then towards the end, it seems that you could think that the definition could be that Madhurya is when there's some sweet pastime of the person that you know is God, that there's this background of Aishwarya, that when an ordinary baby is eating mud, that's just that's not such a nice thing, but when God is eating mud, then that's very sweet. So I'm wondering why Vishwanath is giving this particular definition, why he doesn't say it in a kind of more in the way you explained it.
Well, I will say that he makes that point mainly concerning. I will reply in two ways, according to two levels of, let's say, according to sadhakas and siddhas, if you will. So on one side, Madhurya is when the intimate mood is not slightly transgressed, even in the face of Aishwarya, like you mentioned, a 3 days, if you will, 1 week old baby killing a mile-size demon. But the point is, it's not transgressed from the point of view of the Brajavasis. So he is speaking from how the Brajavasis are perceiving the situation. And at any moment they are thinking, oh, what happened? They are fearful, they are worried. Jashoda starts to invoke different kavachas and protection, and maybe Nyasa and Mudra. We are making full circle and finding that in the Lila again. But the psychology of the Brajavasis, there's no place for the possibility that Krishna may be God, because that will ruin the whole, if you will, rasic experience they are having. So in a natural way, of course, instinctively, naturally, they cannot go in that direction. Their whole mindset's constitution do not give place for it. So I will say, and he's speaking about in that context, he's narrating Krishna Lila, and he's trying to speak about Krishna, but also about the ones who are with Krishna. So the experience of Madhurya for the Raga-nuga practitioners is, I want to identify with the Ragatmikas, with how the inhabitants of Nitya Braj feel in relation to Krishna. So he's trying to describe Madhurya in connection to how they do not feel, oh, there was Aishwarya there. They will be absorbing their respective Madhurya, if you will. While Aishwarya is totally, again, buried under layers and layers of Madhurya. And for us sadhakas, again, one thing for the sadhakas is to have that point of reference to understand, okay, they feel like that. And at the same time, you say this idea, okay, for something to be Madhurya, I think it will be important to know, okay, he is God and he's eating there. So you need to know that in order to experience that. Of course, in case of the Nitya Siddhas, we won't say that they have to go through some educational process. Okay, I know Krishna is God and I'll forget it. But for the sadhakas, that process is there. And that's why I mentioned that we have to know that Krishna is God and then we can forget about that. So we have to go through that tunnel, if you will, of education and becoming aware and acquiring that knowledge, differentiating ordinary human baby pastimes, if you will, and Krishna's Madhurya. So I think that has this twofold like expression. For us sadhakas, yes, we need to acquire that knowledge, but in such a way, in such a context, guided by such people that eventually we will see Krishna in particular term. But I think the main point of Vishwanath is trying to depict the Ragatmika psychology that represent for the Raga sadhakas the role model to follow, not to imitate, because we cannot imitate them, but we can follow as having that as a point of reference. And what we can do as sadhakas is increase proper knowledge, Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam, but in such a way that we will eventually forget certain things and enter into that, like the saying go, ignorance is bliss, no? We find the ultimate application of that in Vrindavan. I don't know if that helps regarding the question.
Yes, thank you. This clears it up very nicely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have one question in the chat section by Abhinash. Let's see. He say, my question is, Krishna has numerous names in terms of Aishwarya Bhav, Audharya Bhav, as well as Madhurya. But as a devotee, which real Krishna we should think every moment in our life? We sometimes confuse which Krishna we should call every time. You nicely explain all forms of Krishna. In conclusion, is it Brajendra Krishna, Brajendra Nandan Krishna? Brajendra is Nanda Maharaj. We should always think in our heart, mind, and soul. Maharaj, you mentioned the Vishnu inside the Krishna body has killed the demon. Is applicable to all demons? Yes, applicable to all demons. And regarding your first question, yes, as we mentioned, that maybe you were not present in the first lectures of this study, but yes, for us as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, our deity in general terms is Krishna in Vrindavan, still is a generic prospect, if you will. Eventually that will become much more specific due to the association we have with certain Vaishnav that will bestow certain impressions, bhakti samskars, and we will have a more specific affinity, which in our sampradaya generally is mainly towards the direction of Madhurya Bhav or Priyanarma Sakya Bhav as the second current. And at the same time, we have the second, if you will, projection towards Nitya Navadvip, serving Mahaprabhu in Dasya Bhav. And that's for sure, that's a good beginning point, as Guru Maharaj will say. If you don't have very clear where I will end up in Vrindavan, if you will, well, you will know, already from day one where you will end up in Nitya Navadvip. That's in Dasya Bhav, some Dasya mixed with Sakya, not the Dasya Bhav of Vaikuntha, that we can already exercise in relation to Sri Guru and Vaishnavas in the Sankirtan Lila we are being part now. So gradually in that context, eventually the details of Krishna in Vrindavan will come. But yes, in general terms, Gaudiya Sampradaya, the rule is, if you will, rule is that Krishna in Vrindavan will be the deity. Of course, there may be exceptions to the rule, and some devotees may find they have affinity towards Ram Bhakti, Vishnu Bhakti, but most probably due to previous Bhakti samskars in other lifetimes. And in a wider sense, we could say Mahaprabhu's dispensation may help them, but in a general sense, that should be the focus. Yes, Vrindavan is the goal, Raga Bhakti is the method for attaining that goal, and we are trying to elaborate on that in this section, in this seminar, in this study. So I hope that helped. No, it's okay. Thank you. Okay, so we can finish here, unless there is some other question. Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you very much to all of you for your time, patience, and questions, and attention, and everything else. So see you next Monday. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Sri Sri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Pranamananda Haribo, Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha पतितानं पवानेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। भू हरि वो।